we have a Spun Today questionnaire submitted by fellow writer Chance Durant. Chance Durant is a sci-fi fantasy author. You can follow him on Twitter at Chance Durant and the number 1. You can check out his latest work in progress, sci-fi novel Construct, on his Kickstarter page, which I have linked to in the episode notes. There you will find a full synopsis of the story, as well as a link to some sample chapters. Chance, thank you very much for taking the time to fill out the Spun Today questionnaire. Other writers or creatives can do the same by going to spuntoday.com/questionnaire. And now let's get into Chance's responses. Question 1. Relating to your craft, do you remember the first thing you ever wrote or created? If so, what was it? And Chance replied, the first story I wrote was for extra credit in 7th grade, about serfs trying to escape from their feudal lord. I've loved writing stories ever since. My first novel was based off of a D&D game, Dungeons & Dragons. I ran for my little brother and cousins. I wrote it when I was 22. It was an okay story, but there's a lot I cringe at when I go back and look at it. And I think we all feel that way about past works, and to be honest, I feel that way about some of the things I'm working on now. But truthfully, I'll take a healthy dose of self-deprecation over thinking that everything I create is gold, like Banyan or something. It's gold, Jerry, it's gold. Question 2. What inspires you to write or create? And Chance replied, I love storytelling. I love the art and history of it, going back to people sitting around the campfire passing hours. It's a beautiful thing. That's interesting. That's a unique response I don't think we've had before in terms of like that history piece. For me, it's definitely the art of it and taking an idea and creating something that didn't exist and creating that world, however big or small, and having people hopefully enjoy it. And if I'm lucky, gain something from it, some insight or something. But that's definitely an interesting component, the history of it, that I hadn't considered before. Question 3, and this is one of my favorite questions of the questionnaire. What is a hobby that you have that is unrelated to your craft? And Chance replied, I coach fencing. I teach at a middle school, and about a decade back, another teacher managed to convince the school to start a fencing team. I had never fenced before and loved the idea, so I volunteered to be an assistant coach if I could learn the sport. It's a low-income district, so we have had to do a bunch of fundraising over the years to get equipment, but each year I get an awesome group of kids out there learning to sword fight. And that's definitely a first, 100%, in terms of responses for this question. And it's one that I immediately started picturing A Knight's Tale, one of my favorite movies. Rest in peace, Heath Ledger. And I also thought about something that I heard probably on a podcast or something that I never really corroborated. And I wonder if there's truth behind this, that certain scholarships give fencing scholarships, certain colleges do. And since it's not as popular a sport as, say, football, basketball, baseball, etc., the scholarships are actually less competitive. So if you're a young kid in high school looking for an edge on your college application, that's definitely something to consider there, if true. But even that aside, how Chance says that he gets an awesome group of kids out there learning how to sword fight every year, that's to be very rewarding for him. And also the kids must have a blast. I mean, I could picture myself in junior high having sword fights with my with my friends. That would have been cool as shit. Question 4. How do you get yourself to sit down and do your work when you're not motivated to? And Chance replied, mostly it's just forcing myself to work. I've written a few books and created a few tabletop role-playing games with NorCal Mythos Entertainment, so we usually have a few different irons in the fire. I just find something that I can get my mind to focus on, creative stuff whenever possible, and editing or number crunching for new systems when I can't get anything original to come out. And that's really cool and helpful advice. I read part of Chance's bio where he mentioned that game that he worked on with NorCal Mythos, which is called Carbine Jungle. And there's 2 others on there, the Hades 8B and Chiron's Keep Mission Decks. I'm probably butchering the names, but yeah, I definitely couldn't agree more with having another creative outlet aside from just the writing. i.e. this podcast for me. And it's like, I find just being in the creative mood and mode, one ultimately winds up feeding the other in interesting ways. And then the other non-creative stuff that he mentions, like the editing or the number crunching, which again, I couldn't agree more, and is definitely worth highlighting because it's not all, fun and games and just the cool creative stuff. It is the editing of the writing, for example, or in reference to this podcast, for example, not just the recording process, but the notes and preparing prior to recording an episode, and then the editing of the episode afterwards, and the marketing of it and distribution, etc. So I feel like there's always something that you could work on in reference to your creative endeavor, even when you're not in that creative mood, or like Chance mentions, if you're having one of those days where nothing original is coming out. It doesn't mean you have to take an L for the day. You can do something else around it. And lastly, question 5. Do you have any advice for other writers or creators, whether they're new, seasoned, or otherwise? And Chance replied, create for the sake of creation. You may succeed and get published. You may fail. But no matter what, you have added another story to the world. That in itself is beautiful. And I could not agree more. Round of applause for that response right there. And Chance Durant, thank you very much for taking the time to fill out the Spun Today questionnaire. Again, folks, follow Chance on Twitter. Chance, CHANCE, Durant, DURANT, the number 1 on Twitter. And check out his Kickstarter for his sci-fi novel Construct, a story about when graduate students develop world-altering technology with the potential to reshape society, which again is linked to in the episode notes. And if you're a fellow writer or creative and want to submit your responses to the 5 questions in the Spun Today questionnaire, you can do so by going to spuntoday.com/questionnaire.